one of the reasons why we have a webinar going on, and you guys are very lucky to get that webinar with Talor. The 15% off the entire Nisi range. This is the final day of it. So if there's anything you see that you really like and you want to grab a good discount on it, I ask you to please take advantage of that. The sale is automatic, so all you have to do is shop. Just shop and put the stuff in the cart and it'll be discounted for you. Talor is going to be talking to us about the subject of polarizing filters and get into it a little bit deeper than most people do and give you a really good understanding of what the benefit of it is. So if you can please join me in welcoming Talor Stone. Talor, I'm gonna turn off my camera and turn off my mic and leave it to you.
Okay, awesome. Well, I will just go ahead and turn on the presentation. So if you'll just give me a moment to share my screen.
An actual female presenter.
Yes, girl power right here.
All right,
Let's see. All right, so everyone should be seeing the presentation now. If not, please just let me know. So today we're going to be talking about polarizers, and I know that many of you probably think you know what polarizers do, or you've probably dabbled with them, but I think you're going to be surprised how much you can actually learn from this. I personally started using polarizers really early on in my photography because I heard that that's just what you're supposed to do if you're doing landscape photography. But it wasn't until more recently that I started getting really interested in how they work. And I'm a huge nerd, so I took a bit of a deep dive into why they actually work the way they do. And it's pretty fascinating. I can't wait to share this with you guys. So before I get too deep into it, just a little bit about myself. So I came to photography a little bit later on, and photography for me has been this fulfillment of just my childhood dreams and my passion. And it really got me started to get super excited about this second career and my second lease on life. I am also a PhD researcher. I do research on climate impacts on the indigenous people in Greenland, which I know sounds very niche, but I really love what I study, and it gives me an excuse to go to Greenland often, and I'll take any excuse I can get. Because of my nerdiness and my love of photography, I really like educating, which is why I love doing these webinars, and I also love workshops. So there's a bit of feedback on the audio, so if your mic isn't muted, please go ahead and do that. And of course, I am a Nisi ambassador, so thank you, Joan, for having me here. I am so excited to present today. Please go ahead and do that. So just a little bit about what we're going to talk about. We'll discuss how polarizers work, CPLs, that's the abbreviation I'm using for polarizers, and we'll get into why that abbreviation is there in a moment. We'll also talk about when to use them and why polarizers are so magical, and we'll talk about some of the cool effects you can do with them. So first, how does a CPL work? I mean, we all know probably that you put this thing on the end of your lens and it spins side to side and it makes some changes on the picture you're seeing, but how does this actually work? And this is where I started taking a deeper dive to try and figure it out. So this is my very crude diagram that I made myself because I wanted a visual aid, so I'm sorry that it's not super pretty. But generally a polarizer is two pieces of glass, and then there are two things that are sandwiched between the glass. So it's like a sandwich. And the light comes in, it goes through the first piece of glass, it hits what's called the linear polarizer, which is an optical film, and then it passes through a quarter wave plate before it enters your camera. So how does this actually work? It seems like magic, but the science is really, really interesting. When sunlight strikes an object, whether it's water or the leaves of a tree or even the clouds in the sky, the light particles can be reflected and scattered in an infinite number of directions. It can bounce off of that surface and it will scatter. It's called randomized light. And that's what we're seeing as glare. So when you're out on a bright sunny day and you're looking at the water and you see light bouncing off of it, or you're looking at a window and it's making you squint, that's the glare that's going to be on almost every surface out there. So that's the randomized light that you're seeing. And it's one of the reasons that many fishermen or other people who work on the water wear polarized sunglasses. It functions in a similar way. So the way that a polarizer works is it takes this glare and it's actually going to block it out. And I'll have a diagram in a moment to help you visualize how this process works. So randomized light creates glare, and glare can occur on almost every surface. So leaves, water, puddles, wet concrete, windows, clouds, you name it, there is glare everywhere around you. You may not even be aware of it, but it can even be the haze in the sky. So if you ever look out across a landscape and you're like, wow, it's kind of hazy and the mountains, they aren't very clear. Often what you're actually seeing is the light hitting particles in the air and it's bouncing in this randomized fashion. And it's creating this haze. So polarizers can even help with that. Now, what happens is that this first layer, remember the diagram that I showed you a minute ago, the light comes in, it passes through glass, and the first thing it hits after that is an optical film layer called a linear polarizer. It's the gatekeeper. This is where all the magic happens. And here's a diagram to kind of show you what is happening. So on the left-hand side, you have randomized light. It's unpolarized light. You have these light waves that are bouncing every which direction. Now, the linear polarizer, it acts like window blinds. That's an analogy that I like to use because it helps you really visualize what's going on. Window blinds have slits in them that are straight, and it's only allowing certain amount of light in straight through those slits. And that's similar to what a linear polarizer does. These light waves are passing through and it's filtering out all of the randomized light, and it's only letting in linear polarized light, which is the light wave that aligns parallel to the slits. So you can see that in this diagram where the unpolarized light hits this linear polarizer, and only linearly polarized light is what's passing through it. And this is the magic that cuts out the glare. So a linear polarizer has this function, but a circular polarizer, which is what most of us use today, does one additional thing. So a circular polarizer, it's called circular not because the polarizer is circular on the end of your lens, although I admit that that's originally what I thought. What it actually is doing is the quarter wave plate, which is right behind the linear polarizer, is spinning the light in a circular direction. So in this diagram, you'll see that the light is coming from the right-hand side and the wave of the light is kind of haphazard. It hits the linear polarizer, and as you go from left to right, now you have linearly polarized light. And now remember, there's one other layer before you exit the polarizer, and that's the quarter wave plate. And this quarter wave plate takes that polarized light and actually spins it. Okay, and so what it's doing, this is obviously where circular polarizer comes from. It's a circularly polarized light, and spinning the light is what is helping your camera avoid problems with autofocus and light metering that initially created issues when polarizers were originally made when they were just linear. So there's more science, but we're not going to delve too much into the nerdy speak. Now you understand just the basics of how a circular polarizer works. And hopefully it'll give you a bit of a new appreciation of just how amazing the science is behind this little tool. You know, next time you slap on that piece of glass onto the end of your lens, you're going to have a better understanding of what it's doing. So now, well, before I move on, I want to mention that quality matters. And the reason that I'm mentioning that is because think about how many components are making up this polarizer. You have two pieces of glass, you have two optical layers, a linear polarizer film, you have the quarter wave plate. These are all things that can impact the quality of your image. So it's super, super important that you have really great quality glass, that you have a linear polarizing film that doesn't create color cast and that works really well. and that all of your components are made very high quality, because these all can seriously impact the quality of your image. So when you're trying to decide what type of polarizer you want to buy, this is really important. And just a plug for Nisi is that they actually have some really interesting choices for polarizers, because the type of linear polarizing film can affect the color cast. And sometimes you may want more saturation or more of a natural tone or more of a neutral tone. I personally really love using the landscape polarizer because it has a film that enhances the saturation of greens and blues just slightly, and it really makes the images pop. So when you're making a choice about what type of polarizer you want, these are the things you really need to consider. So a polarizer uses this science that we just covered, and it creates a really magical effect by removing glare. And the amazing thing is that this polarizer effect, the polarizing effect of using one, it is almost impossible to replicate this in post-processing, right? So the effects of actually applying a polarizer correctly and removing that glare, you're going to really struggle to replicate that in Photoshop or Lightroom using any technique. So this is one of the most essential pieces of equipment that it's really important that you have, because there's just no substitute. So it's using this science to create an effect that really feels like magic when you're using it. And it's pretty easy to do. All you have to do is just simply rotate the circular polarizer so that the lines in it are perpendicular to the reflected light. Now, the good news is that you don't need a protractor or anything to figure out how do you get the lines perpendicular to the reflected light. It's going to be easy for you to just visually see this on your own. And if you've applied polarizers in the past, you probably already have a sense of how you can spin it and find out when it is being aligned properly. So aligning it is pretty easy. All you have to do is compose your shot just like you normally would. And I tend to move the polarizer fairly quickly. If you're moving it very slowly, sometimes you may have difficulty discerning the change that you're seeing. So you can look directly through your viewfinder or use live view. Or if you have mirrorless, it will automatically be simulated on the back of your camera screen. And I tend to rotate the polarizer pretty quickly because our human brains are wired. We're just hardwired as people to recognize change. So when you spin it fairly quickly, you will be able to see the difference. And I generally will look for subtle changes in areas like the sky or on wet surfaces, or I'll look at things like green leaves to watch for saturation being enhanced. So it should be fairly obvious to you when you get it in the right place. Although, as we'll discuss in a moment, there are differences in the amount of polarizing effect that you will see depending on which way you are pointing your camera. Don't worry, we'll cover that in a minute. But just a couple of tips before I move on. If you are having a difficult time seeing the change made by your polarizer, I recommend that you spin the polarizer a little bit faster and that you specifically look at wet surfaces. Like in this image, I would be looking specifically at the dark, wet rocks to look for when the glare is removed. Looking at darker surfaces, wet surfaces, that tends to help really well. It makes a big difference in your ability to discern the change when the polarizer is properly aligned. So another thing that you need to keep in mind is that if I'm pointing in this image at this particular series of water and I align the polarizer properly and I take my shot, what if I were to make a 90-degree turn to the left and start shooting a different scene? Well, now the light is bouncing at me in a completely different pattern. And you have to remember to repeat this process anytime you recompose your image in a different direction, because your polarizer will probably no longer be properly aligned. When I'm teaching workshops, this is something I'm constantly finding myself reminding people, is that if you pivot and point in a different direction, you have to respin your polarizer. And this is a very easily forgotten step. So if you're taking notes, just make a special note to remember that you always have to repeat this process when you recompose in a different direction. So this is another wonderful diagram that I made because I'm a visual learner and diagrams help, at least for me. So hopefully they're helpful for you as well. I want to talk about when is the appropriate time to use a polarizer. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil it. And the answer is almost always. So a polarizer's effect varies depending on the sun's position. So what does that mean? It means that the maximum effect of your polarizer is when you're pointing 90 degrees from the sun. And this is really easy to find. Again, no protractor required. You use the L method, which is what this diagram is showing you. It's very, very easy for you to just make the shape of an L with your finger and point your index finger directly at the sun. And then if you rotate your wrist left and right, that is your 90 degrees. So as you can see in this diagram, the red arrow is showing you where 90 degrees is. And at noon, when the sun is high in the sky, you can see that almost everywhere, 360 degrees around you, as long as you're pointing at the horizon, you are going to have the maximum effect of your polarizer. And this is one of the reasons that it is often said that polarizers should be used mostly at midday. And I'll get into in a moment why that's not necessarily only the time you should use a polarizer. So a polarizer like this, I'll show you the diagram again. The diagram does show that at noon, for example, everything on your horizon is 90 degrees to the sun, which is going to be the maximum effect of your polarizer. But that doesn't mean it's the only time that you use one. Remember that we live in a very three-dimensional world. Every direction you can point your camera creates a sphere, right? And there are graduations of the effectiveness of your polarizer. So just because the maximum effect is at 90 degrees doesn't mean that you don't get benefit out of it when you're pointing in a different direction. This is one of the reasons that I almost always shoot with a polarizer. I mean, I have a polarizer on my camera almost all of the time. It is so useful, even when it's not at its maximum effect, it still has some value. So polarizers will still have some effect in almost every single situation. The only time that a polarizer will have little or almost no effect is if you're pointing directly at the sun, or as if you are pointing directly away from the sun. And I just want to go back to that diagram to explain why. So if you see here, the maximum effect is at 90 degrees, then you can think of it in terms of this being a gradient. So if this is 100%, as you move up, you're getting closer and closer to zero. And then you're coming back around, hopefully you can see my arrow, to where you're at 100% effectiveness. So think of it more as like a sphere. So if you were to point 45 degrees up, you would still get some benefit of that polarizer, but that effect is less and less if you're pointing directly at the sun or directly away. So one of the tricks that I use to help me understand and help others learn when a polarizer may not be the most effective is to look at your shadow on the ground. So your shadow is pointing directly away from the sun. So if you follow the line of your shadow, both in front of you and behind you, that is going to be the area of least effect with your polarizer. And as long as you're pointing anywhere else, you're going to get some benefit out of the polarizer. So I can't have this discussion about polarizers without covering a couple common issues. And these are issues that always come up when I'm trying to teach clients about how to use them. And one of them is banding. And these are all problems that you'll see as I present as I go through all the points here, that they're really easily dealt with. They're not actually significant problems at all. So banding, another lovely diagram that I've made for you. So banding is created oftentimes when the sun is lower on the horizon and you're using a wide lens. Now in this diagram, you can see the 90-degree line where the maximum effect of your polarizer is made. So the banding occurs 90 degrees from the sun. And since the sun is low on the horizon, that means that line of maximum effect is diagonal across the sky. Now, if you're using a wide lens, your lens is going to capture a lot more than just this one little sliver. You're going to capture a greater range of the sky. So you're getting the 100% maximum effectiveness, 80%, 70%, 60%. Like you're getting the entire range because you have a very wide lens, lots of sky, and the sun is low. So one of the ways that you can deal with this is by slightly backing off of the polarizer. So instead of aligning it to the maximum effect, if you just back it off a little bit, oftentimes that banding will go away. Another solution is to switch lenses. So instead of using a super wide angle lens, try moving to a zoom lens so that you can focus in on just one particular part of the scene, and that's going to generally remove the banding from your frame. And another solution is to recompose. So when I really want to use a wide angle lens and I know that I'm having a banding issue, I will think about how can I compose this image where I don't have just a huge blue sky. Blue skies aren't very interesting anyway, so it's pretty easy to recompose by tipping your lens down or finding some other object to fill the sky with so that you don't actually see this banding in an exaggerated way. Because sometimes you just want to use that wide angle lens, so you have to find a way to make it work. So here's an example of banding. This is just a shot taken at home. The sun was low and to my left, and as you can see here, I have a very dark area in the sky. I was using a 15mm lens, and so this is just demonstrating how banding actually can look. So if you go back and you're using a polarizer and you're looking at your images and saying, hey, why does the sky look so weird? It's because you're running into a banding issue, and you can actually go through those steps by backing off your polarizer, recomposing, or switching to a different lens to solve it. And ultimately, if you really end up with this picture, you didn't catch it while you're out in the field, it is difficult to fix in post-processing, but it is not impossible. And there's many tools online to show you how, or you can just message me and I can give you some tips on how you can actually correct this. So, oh, here's more diagrams. Apparently, I'm really obsessed with diagrams. So another issue that you see sometimes with polarizers is an over darkening of the sky, or when the sky just appears a very surreal color blue. You can see this in this area. The sky should not be that color. That is not the color of the sky. And so what is happening here is that the maximum effect is just too strong. And this happens often when the sun is high, and again, you're using a very wide lens. Again, this is a very simple thing to fix, and you can do so simply by backing off of the polarizer slightly until the saturation level of the sky is acceptable. So again, there's no need to ditch the polarizer because you can still get a huge benefit out of it. All you need to do is just slightly back off until the sky is a more natural color blue, and it's easily fixed. So these examples of problems that you can run into with a polarizer, as you can see, they're really easily solved. And this doesn't constitute a reason not to use them. It just gives you more tools about how to actually deal with these problems when you're out in the field. So I'm going to move on to talking about why polarizers are so magical. But before I do that, Jem, did I have any questions in the chat that I could address before I move on?
Hi there. I have been trying to answer the questions as they come along. I did have one question which I'll address that came off of the YouTube, which is someone who has a polarizer that doesn't appear to rotate, which to me, if it's a Nisi product, we have a polarizer that you screw into a rotating mount. But if that's not what it is, I don't know what kind of polarizer you have, because they all should be in a rotating mount or they screw into a rotating mount. So that's the story there. Even a square polarizer, when you put it into a filter holder, then you rotate it to get the effect that you want. There was the question about basically what is banding. And I've got to say, you did an unbelievably excellent job of explaining it. But simply what the banding is it's a dark patch of the sky where the polarization's at its maximum, and it's darker than the rest of the sky. So that's what that is. There was a question about what do you do when it's a cloudy day?
Oh, cloudy day. I mean, that's my jam. So as you'll see here in a moment, polarizers are amazing for clouds. I'll just stick with me. I'll demonstrate for you. And the banding, actually, it doesn't always have to be bad. I actually have an image coming up where you can see visible banding, but I used it to my advantage. So these are things that are often put forward as drawbacks. I hear complaints about polarizers, and these are problems that people have with them, but they're not actually problems. You just have to know how to use them or deal with them. And for me, there's no reason not to be using a polarizer unless I'm shooting directly into the sun. I pretty much always have one on. So, and hopefully my diagrams were helpful, and they were learning tools, because I think I might have gotten a little carried away with them. So now that we understand the science behind how a polarizer works, and hopefully that discussion enriched your understanding of them, and we already talked a little bit about how you use them and how you know to get the maximum effect and some of the problems. Now I want to talk a little bit about why they are just so amazing. So all the images that I've shown you today, every single one of them is using a polarizer, and that's on me. I should have been pointing out earlier just the difference that these images make, but I do have some before and afters that are coming up in a moment, and that will help you see just how incredible these tools are. So polarizers are amazing. I already mentioned that it is impossible or very, very difficult to replicate any of the effects of a polarizer in post-processing. I don't care what program it is you're using. All right, that's why this is an indispensable tool in the field, and it's always the #1 filter that I recommend that people buy. If they're buying a first-time filter, the polarizer is the most important one for you to get first. So removing glare actually allows you to do some really cool creative things. And I'll go through some of these examples with photos, but just briefly, it's going to let you see through water, which is super cool. It enhances wet surfaces by darkening them or removing glare. And it lets you do cool things like shoot through glass. So if you've ever seen pictures like editorial style or commercial photos of, the girl in the coffee house window with her cup of coffee and it's shot through glass, they're using a polarizer to get those shots. So you can do some really cool creative things with them. You can also darken the sky, especially when the sky is super bright. It enhances the texture and detail in your clouds. It will give you a really invaluable tool to help you salvage flat midday light. So oftentimes I shoot a lot in the middle of the day. I don't understand what people are talking about when they say there's only 2 good times to shoot. It's the golden hours, sunrise or sunset. No, there's no such thing as bad light. You just need the right tools, and a polarizer is going to let you go shoot in the middle of the day. And it will also reveal the true colors, particularly greens and reds. So I know many of you are probably getting ready to go shoot fall foliage. And look, let me tell you, a polarizer is a game changer for fall foliage. If you want your reds and oranges and yellows to pop, put on a polarizer. It will make a game-changing difference when you're shooting foliage. And it can also remove haze if you're shooting telephotos, like mountains in the distance. Having a polarizer is going to strip out that haze so that you get a clean shot. It will also tremendously help with slowing your shutter speed when you don't want to add an ND filter, because a polarizer can be anywhere from 1 to 2 stops of light difference. And so oftentimes you won't need to apply an ND filter if you're shooting in low light conditions. I do this all the time when I'm shooting waterfalls, which is one of my greatest obsessions for photography. And oftentimes I don't need an ND filter. I'll just put on a polarizer, and that will reduce the light just enough for me to get the shot that I'm after. So I do want to go through a couple example images. Some of them are before and after.
So 250 more thumbs up.
Okay, I'm not sure what that was. So some of the images I have before and afters for. Unfortunately, when you are out shooting in the field, you often do not remember to take the before and after picture. You're just shooting. So forgive me for not having more before and after shots, but I'll go through a couple of examples. These are just unedited shots so that you can see exactly the difference without any type of editing. So like I mentioned, polarizers can help you see through water. So in this image, you have without a polarizer, and then with a polarizer. So I'll just do before and after here, and you can see that the stones in the lake are revealed. Now, with a little bit of editing, you could make this be a really great shot. So here is another example of seeing through water. This is using a polarizer, and I mentioned that I had an example for you where you could see banding taken to your advantage. That's what's happening here. I'm using a 15mm lens, so really, really wide. And you can see in this image that the polarizer's maximum effect is really localized right here. But I actually like this effect. I've spun the polarizer so that the banding is occurring in the water so that I get really clear shot right here, which is that 100% maximum effect of your polarizer and without any type of disturbance up here in the blue sky. So sometimes you can use that banding to your benefit just by simply spinning it into the place that you want to use it. So I mentioned enhancing wet surfaces. This is a huge difference in the before and after. This is a waterfall in North Carolina, and with absolutely no editing, only rotating the polarizer, you can go from this super glary image. I mean, like, this is unsalvageable. I would never want to show this to anyone. And you just can immediately, the only thing I've done is spin the polarizer. So without the polarizer, with the polarizer. I mean, that is a huge difference. And all you have to do is look at the wet surfaces in the areas that are dark. But I also keep an eye on the foliage on the plants and what happens to the green. I mean, the green just really, it reveals that true color. In the before image, you don't even see the red moss here. You can hardly see it at all. And in the after image, all that beautiful red is revealed. So it's a huge difference. Again, there's no editing possible on this planet to make that change. Only a polarizer can do that. Here's another example with wet surfaces. This is another waterfall in beautiful North Carolina. So you can go from this image, which was shot like late morning, like 10 a.m. The light was getting really, really, really difficult to shoot in. So all I had to do, put in a polarizer, and now I still have a perfectly acceptable image. So the before and after. And not only does it remove the glare on the dark surfaces, but it also lets you see the stones underneath the water, which is really great. I mentioned that it can help darken the sky. So in this image, just shot at noon off of my balcony, go from one to the other. So I've really darkened the sky a lot, and the clouds have far more texture and detail in them. They're more multi-dimensional versus just kind of flat, and instead we've added a bit of contrast. And again, no editing, simply spinning a polarizer. Enhancing clouds, you could see that in the previous example, but also here, you can see that the clouds are really darkened and you get lots of texture out of them. And this is because clouds are made of water, right? They're tiny little water droplets. Every single one of those droplets of water is reflecting light, every one of them. So spinning the polarizer is removing the glare directly out of the clouds, which is pretty amazing. So if you just imagine that you're shooting a landscape with a blue sky and perfect white puffy clouds, using a polarizer is going to pop those clouds right out of the shot. So anytime I see white puffy clouds on the sky, I love using a polarizer because it really, really makes the clouds pop. And revealing true colors, I actually just shot this image yesterday. I was thinking, wow, this is such a good example to show during this presentation. I saw this pond with some lilies in it, and it was so pretty, but the light was just trash. I mean, the light was really awful. You could not get a decent shot in this midday glare. So here's the difference. I swear I have not edited anything at all. It's just the polarizer. You literally can't even see the flower in this shot because it's swallowed up by the glare. And then all you have to do is spin that polarizer, bam, now you have this beautiful white flower, and you can see the rich greens of these lily pads, and the water is darkened. So it is a completely transformed image. You could not get this image without a polarizer. And I mentioned removing haze. I wish I had a before image of this because this is shot in Lone Pine, California. It's a notoriously dusty place. In fact, Lone Pine is rated the worst for dust-borne air quality in the United States. So this is a very hazy environment to shoot a telephoto shot of the mountains. It is notoriously difficult to get clean shots there because of all the haze. So I used a polarizer during the midday so that I could get this nice clean shot of the mountain and remove all the reflected light out of the atmosphere. So, and it really revealed the moon by darkening the sky a little bit and letting the moon pop. So got a nice clean shot there. And I mentioned slowing the shutter speed. So in this image, I was able to only apply a polarizer in order to slow my shutter speed to 1/2 second, which is exactly how long I needed to get this shot. And the added benefit is that it revealed all of the stones underneath the water. So as you can see, polarizers are super versatile. I mean, these are really, I mean, in my opinion, it feels like magic, but now you know it's actually just science, but the magic is still real in your pictures. So they're versatile. The effects are difficult or impossible to replicate no matter what type of post-processing you're doing. And it is useful in a huge array of situations. You can almost always for a polarizer if you remember to apply it correctly by aligning it properly, by rotating it, avoiding some of the pitfalls and taking advantage of the benefits. So that was pretty short and sweet, and now I'd be really happy to take some questions.
Excuse me, Jim, this is Gino.
Hello there.
My question was, with a circular polarizer filter, when you photograph aquariums, I was told that if to put the lens right against the glass to remove
Yes,
the
yes.
glare.
Now
So that
I
was my
understand.
question. So do I still have to do that with a CPL?
Yes, the CPL will cut down, well, okay, there was a question while you were explaining,
Okay.
shooting, weather work in a aquarium. He wanted to know about shooting through glass in an aquarium. There's the trick about eliminating reflection back of yourself by putting the front of the lens directly on the glass, so the glass in essence becomes the clear filter in front of your lens.
Right.
And what will the polarizer do to help that?
Well, I mean, I think that you'd still apply the same principle. You'd still press it directly up against the glass. I haven't personally been in this type of situation, but the polarizer, if you were back away from the glass, could help reduce any type of reflected light. But still, your best approach is probably going to be pressed directly up against the glass to get the cleanest shot possible.
Yeah, and I do believe that if you have direct reflection, like if you're shooting straight into glass, that's not when the polarizer will really effectively cut the reflection off of glass. You have to be at somewhat of an oblique angle to the glass to allow the polarizer to reduce the reflection.
That sounds right to me, Jim. I did see a question about.
So it's digital. I'll just shoot both of them and see what's best.
Yeah, you have plenty of film.
Thank you, Jim, for explaining that. I didn't really understand why you did it, but now I understand.
Cool.
So David had a question about cutting the haze with the smoke in the sky. I know this has to be a really awful problem for you guys out there. So it will definitely help cut the haze. It will, but it's not going to remove the smoke out of the sky, right? But there is a possibility for it to have a positive impact on your image by cutting down on the light that's reflected by hitting that smoke. So we'll say it's a step in the right direction.
Taylor,
Mm-hmm.
this is Dan. I have three very quick questions, I think.
Okay.
One is, you talked about polarizing sunglasses and fishermen out on the water. I remember as a kid, they came out with Polaroid sunglasses, and it had this extra little tag that had the other film, and you could hold it up to the light and rotate it. So you look through the sunglass, look through that little filter thing and see, oh, this really works. What I don't understand is, how does it work with only one piece? Is that a linear, and you just don't have the cross polarizer, the quarter,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
how is
so
that
the
still very effective without the
right.
second element?
Yeah, so polarized sunglasses are just linearly polarized. And honestly, all the visual magic of a polarizer happens there. The quarter wave plate that spins it in a circular pattern, that's really just to help the mechanics of your camera with things like autofocus and how does it meter the light properly. So that's more of the back end magic to make your camera work, but all the actual visible difference that comes from a polarizer happens with that linear polarizing optical film. So any type of sunglasses, they're just linear polarized glasses, and they will work pretty much as well as a polarizer for your camera will. It's just a metering difference.
Okay, I'm sure you're far too young to remember those Polaroid tag sunglasses, but I'm sure there are others of my generation here. Okay, next question. I have several Sony wide angle lenses that don't have filter threads. I know that you can get adapters that fit on, but please tell me that the adapters are all the same for different Sony wide angle lenses.
I don't want to lie to you, Jim. I think you're going to have to take this one.
Yes. If you have an ultra wide lens that doesn't take a front threaded filter, we have the S6 as a solution for that. What it basically is it's almost like you're putting a lens hood on top of the lens hood of the lens. You put this device over the lens hood that's built into the lens, and it then uses a compression ring to lock it solidly on.
No,
That ring then holds a polarizing filter in front of your ultra wide lens.
no, I'm sorry. I knew all that, but will one adapter work for the 14 millimeter, for the 12 to 24?
No. But you don't have to buy an S6 for each lens. You just buy the adapter for your lens and then use the polarizer and the frame for shooting. So you buy, and I'll talk to you about prices. And don't forget, they're 15% off.
10% off.
They're you would buy, for example, the S6 for the 12 to 24 Sony lens for $519, but then for $159 you buy the rear adapter for your Sony 14 millimeter lens, and then you can share the polarizer and the frame with between the two lenses.
And does the 519 include the lens, the filter rather? Sorry.
Yes, it does. 519 gets you the adapter for one lens, the polarizing filter, and the filter frame, which holds the 150 millimeter filters.
Okay, and is the same adapter for the 12 to 24, whether it's the GM28 or the
No,
G?
they're different.
Of
You
course
have
they
to
are.
choose either the 2.8 or the F4,
Yeah, of course they're
one
different.
or the other.
Okay.
I know. Well, baby needs new shoes. What can I tell you? No, we can't. It would be great to make something universal, but it would be haphazard, and those lenses are too expensive for you to put, some, not properly engineered piece of equipment on it. So Steve had asked, I just recently purchased the Nisi Starter Plus kit, and I got the enhanced polarizer. Do I need any other CPL? And Steve, you know what? No, you really don't. If you want to spend the money and have two variations of polarizing filters, you can, but really, with the enhanced polarizer, if you need to cut the saturation down, you can always do that in post. I see no reason for you to have to buy two polarizers. However, if you do, again, we'll be very grateful for the extra money. When you rapidly rotate the CPL filter, do you rotate 90 degrees, 180 degrees, or 360 degrees? Contestant number one.
Yeah, so I actually just spin it in a full circle until I see the effect. So instead of just rotating 90 degrees like this, I literally have a finger on it and I'm just spinning it. So this is actually really easy to do with Nisi's square filter holder system, because they actually have a wheel on the side, which, oh, Jim, I love this wheel. It's awesome. You just literally spin the little wheel and the whole thing rotates. But if you don't have that system, personally, I just use my index finger to spin it fairly quickly, and within 180-degree rotation, you will see the difference. I mean, it has to occur within that
And pretty
180.
much your brain will see the whole spectrum of what the filter can do, and then you can narrow it down to what you
Yeah.
do. So here's a great question, because I don't even know the answer to it. Can a CPL help with heat shimmer?
No, it cannot. I answered her in the chat. I wish it could, because that would solve a lot of issues, especially with wildlife and a telephoto lens.
So
I wish that it would.
I'm going to jump over to Tim Davis, who's watching us on YouTube.
Okay.
And Tim asked if a VND is just two polarizers. And yes, it is. It's basically two polarizers that when they align up, they have maximum density. And when they're it's like magnets, when they're opposite poles, they clear up as much as they do. But added density is there for, if like our 1.5 to 5 stop is basically two out of the box polarizers. Our 5 to 9 stop has an ND coating on there. And then jumping back to Patrick, who asked, we have a filter that's really overlooked. I've got to say, if I were standing behind the counter of a camera store, I would sell a lot of these filters. We have a combination 6-stop and polarizer that's in a mounted ring. And if you just want to have one long exposure filter on your lens and just be able to have a lot of fun without having to carry a lot of gear, it's an awesome filter. Do I personally use one? I personally use one. I doubt that Talor does, because she's got our V6 system, which gives her the most versatility.
I like having the modular system. I get to pick and play.
Is a UV filter really useless? Oh, I'd love to hear your opinion of this, Talor.
Oh, I mentioned it in the chat. I think a lot of people use them to prevent lens scratching. Most modern lenses and cameras, it's not necessary anymore for you to have a UV filter, although of course it is functional, because it's a lot cheaper for you to ding up a UV filter than it is to ding up the front element of your lens. Personally, I don't use it, and the reason why. So the first reason is because if I start stacking things on top of my lens, you can run into vignetting when you're using a wider field of view. So I want to avoid any type of vignetting issue. So I choose to ditch the UV filter so that I can avoid that. The other thing is that the more things you put in front of your lens, you are introducing more possibility for you to have issues like lens flare, or have the light bounce in a really weird way as it's entering your camera. So I tend to ditch it, because I just want to minimize the lens flaring as much as possible. So those are my reasons.
Okay, and what I'll say about it is, I have not been able to give up using UV filters, but I take them off all the time. I like them being there. I like them being there when I'm bouncing around and just doing stuff. But then when I go to when I'm trying to plan my picture taking and I know I'm going to be concentrating on it, I pretty much use UV filters in lieu of lens caps, because I want my camera ready to go at all times. Heat shimmer. Which polarizer is the one you refer to as a landscape polarizer? You will virtually always buy a landscape polarizer from Nisi unless you're looking not to. Our landscape polarizer and enhanced polarizer are always labeled on our titles. And then our regular polarizer is called the Pro Polarizer. But don't get comfortable with that, because you're going to see a new polarizer soon. So there you go. We're gonna make you own a lot of polarizers.
They all work really great, so I wouldn't stress too much about the difference between them.
Yeah. Jim, what 67 millimeter CPL do you recommend? I really do recommend our enhanced polarizer, but we also make a polarizer called the natural polarizer, and it's very color neutral, and those are going to be emerging and become more important over the coming months. But we already have them in the mounted ring, and I love it. It's wonderful.
Awesome.
I think
Well,
that's
hopefully you're
it.
going to sell a bunch of polarizers, Jim. I think this is such an awesome tool. I wish that people use them more. You know, it's one of the things that is a required piece of equipment for any of my workshops. You have to have a polarizer because it is just that important.
All right. Well, folks, if we are done, hold on. How do you feel about the magnetic ones over the groovy ones? I love the groovy ones. They're fab, baby.
Yeah, and they all work the same ultimately, whether it's magnetic or screw on. So I would say that I don't necessarily have a preference. As long as it's a high quality polarizer, you're probably good to go.
The current statement that Nisi has about magnetic polarizers is this. They have two issues that our factory does not like them. One is they add weight. And the second thing is that if you're an adventurer and you're walking around and everything, you could be hiking around with your camera slung over your shoulder and then look down and your polarizer's gone. So it just, magnets are great, but they're not physically locked on and attached. So there you go. Why use an enhanced polarizer as opposed to one that is neutral that you can make changes in tint? That goes back to our core policy, Alan, which is get the best image you can while you're in the field. And that way, when
100%.
you're working in Photoshop, you're
I could
not
not agree more.
fixing, you're enhancing.
Yeah, I always just try and get it right when I'm out in the field personally. Of course, you can make those changes later. It comes down to your personal style, but for me, it's so important to get my shot correct in field. I don't do any type of real Photoshop or any photo manipulation. So I really only have one chance to get that shot. So
That's
that's
also
why.
why That's also why I'm very excited about the neutral polarizers that are starting to emerge from us, because actually even the enhanced polarizer, that's great, and I love the images I get from it and everything, but it's nice to be able to tweak the color. And when you got a real, what's funny is that I recognized with polarizers very early on how they make the sky muddy looking. Old ones do, or the general issue polarizer makes the sky muddy. I used to actually stack it with an 81C, which the old timers will recognize was like a cooling filter that you used to use to take pictures indoors by natural light, just to kind of get that orangey out of the image. So it's kind of cool to actually have a polarizer that has that built into it. Not a good filter for shooting star trails? I don't think so. Not really.
Yeah,
What do
I
you think?
agree.
Yeah.
For Steve, star trails, you probably don't want to use the softened star filter because it'll possibly reduce the crispness of your star trails. There was a question about cloudy days. I just want to make sure that I'm clear about this, and I probably should have mentioned it in the presentation. Polarizers still work even when it's cloudy. Even when it's cloudy, there is light bouncing around, there's still glare. The effect may be slightly reduced, but I promise you a polarizer still works when it's cloudy. I still use it all the time. It does not have to be a sunny day.
Cool. I want to answer this question about, do you have to buy directly from Nisi to get the 15% off? If our dealers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, you can buy from your favorite dealer and get 15% off. But since it's ending at midnight tonight, I guess we're kind of a safer bet if you really want to buy something and you want to get the 15 off. That will not be around for a long time. If you want to buy, tonight's the night to go for it. square filter, square HD filter is a linear polarizer, and the benefit over a landscape is nothing except for it's a much more basic polarizer. It's linear, it'll work fine. There's a slim chance that it could mess with your autofocus, but if it does, turn it, focus, lock your focus, position it the way you want it, and you're fine. Right. A BH doesn't need a discount code either. No, they are discounted, and they are wonderful. We love them. So, how do we handle lens hood? Actually, that's a good question. We have not really come up with an answer for a hood yet. Stand by, we're working on it, but lens hood and our system, that just doesn't happen. Use your hand.
Yeah, so I want to answer Steve's question. He asked if he's using an ND filter or a graduated ND filter, should he take the CPL off? And the answer is no. So when I am setting up out in the field, I am really notorious for stacking my filters, especially because I do a lot of waterfall photography. So usually I have a CPL, an ND filter, and a graduated ND filter. So I'm really laying it on. And the order in which I do that is the CPL is always on first, and I put that the closest to my camera lens, which is how the V6 system is set up already. And then I stack on top of that, and that's going to be your ND filter. And then I always add the graduated filter last. That way I can rotate it into place as needed. So you can stack them.
And why is it best to have the polarizer behind the ND filter?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Because you need to be able to actually properly align it before you add the ND filter so that you can see the effect.
You can't see with the ND filter on. I love this question. I don't even really know the answer to it. I'd have to think about it. Does focal length have any effect on the polarizer?
No, it actually doesn't. But the difference that you're going to see is that it's a smaller portion of the sky. So for example, if you're photographing a blue sky, if you have a really wide lens, you are going to experience probably a little bit of banding in that sky, which is where the polarizing effect is just unevenly distributed across the sky. Well, when you add a zoom lens, you're effectively cropping out part of the sky. So you're removing that issue, and you're only going to be seeing just a piece of the sky, but the effect is going to be exactly the same.
Somebody said some hoods have a little door at the bottom. I think hopefully we'll see something like that soon.
Yeah.
Some lenses have a little slot so you can open up so you can rotate the polarizer.
That would be amazing.
Well, all I know is I've been hearing that question for the 2 years I've been here. So I am sure the engineers are working on something. All righty. Well, that was great. Wow. Love that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate how long everyone stuck around to ask questions. I just want to throw out there that even though this presentation is ending, you can always reach out to me. I always answer my messages. So you can contact me on my website or on Instagram or wherever you can find me. And if you have questions, you can just send them to me because I will take the time out of my day to answer them for you. So if you're looking for me online, it's always a pop quiz of whether or not you can properly spell my name because it's Talor without a Y in it. So there you have it.
And I know that it was mentioned or asked really quick about, do you do workshops? And this woman does a lot of workshops.
Yes, I'm very busy. A lot of
people who really love going with her. One day I hope I can tag along and be like the Nisi pop-up store wherever you're working there.
Yes,
really
Jim, you're always invited.
Really an amazing presentation. I actually can't say it enough. You brought it home. It's a remarkable presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I hope you'll have an amazing night. And thanks so much for taking your time out to be here.
Thank you. And don't forget, 15% off till midnight tonight. All right. Thank you guys. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.